Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Instruxi's Fireside Chat. We've got a provocative and exciting chat today. I believe it's going to be quite challenging for you. I'm your host, Mathew Harrowing. Julia Main is your producer. And I have with me here Ron Bienvenu, author, futurist, financier, technologist. So imagine a world where all of your inner thoughts and innermost desires are monitored. Now imagine that world where those thoughts and desires are commercialized. Now, moving on, what if they were being re-guided, reprogrammed, pointed in a new direction? Well, today, this is what Ron is arguing in his recent book, The Fifth Shock, which is a provocative view of how modern society is being controlled and moving towards a moment in time of where our free will and free expression is being dominated by this amorphous machine called the stack. We'll unpick all of this as we get going, but Ron argues that this stack, which is this conglomeration of technology, which is really guiding things at the moment and moving to quite an interesting world, Ron argues this is re-engineering our soul. Now, not our soul from a religious perspective, but the essence of who we are, our consciousness. Let's get into it. Ron, really happy you're with us today. Thank you very much. An
Great to be here,
amazing,
Matthew.
thank you. It's an amazing journey. When reading your book, I felt like I started off reading Manly P. Hall's views on the philosophical schools and esotericism and God and the nature of the soul. Then we moved into a view that was akin to what I can think of Alvin Toffler's Future Shock, where he looks at technology is coming so fast that we're now in this state of constant shock and awe. Feels like we're feeling culture shock every day because life around us are changing. Then we move into a framework of like akin to Alvin Toffler as we look at AI and automation entering the world. So with a little overlay of a bit of Atlas Shrugs, it felt like it was in there. It was it was a real joy. It was an incredible treatise and more of a rallying cry for providing a framework of how we are today. So before we get into the details of your book and your vision for the future, you and I have been friends for a long time. I consider you one of life's unbreakables. You've
Well,
probably
that
not
makes
heard
one of
that.
us.
You've probably not heard of that. But tell us your journey. Tell us how you got here, and tell us. I mean, you're wearing a Nietzsche T-shirt. I know you're a Nietzsche fanboy. Give us some background context.
Yeah, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's really great to be here, and Julia did a great job setting this up, so thank you all. My camera all of a sudden seems blurry. It was not blurry earlier, so if I come across blurry, apologies.
No, that was a
Uh,
setting I put on for our audience sake. You're all welcome.
Listen, the less you see of me, the better. It's not a big deal. Uh, and it's funny you should bring up Atlas Shrugged because the one thing I thought about instead of this background was I have a banner that says, "Who is John Galt?" And I was going to put that behind me instead. So, but I should shill the book, I guess. And so thank you. Yeah, I've had a fun life. I don't really I certainly haven't taken the typical course of getting here, as a writer, as a person who thinks about the future, and as you said, I've been a business person, an entrepreneur. I teach at Tulane University, business school. But my journey starts, from rural Louisiana. Always fascinated with ideas. I read Atlas Shrugged when I was about 14, and that put the hook in me that I wasn't going to die in rural Louisiana, nothing wrong with it. Those people are the happiest people on the planet. But it really inspired me to pursue bigger ideas and an adventure. So I went to LSU, ran out of money, went to the army. They said, "What do you know how to do?" I said, "I know how to crack code, hack code." So self-taught. So I did that for a little while and went back to school. And then I got a chance to visit a friend in New York City, and I went to visit and never left, and literally slept on the floor of a condemned building for 3 years. And my weekends, because I work 3 jobs every day, but on weekends, I would go to this little coffee shop, I'd go to the library, get a philosophy book, and I would sit and read literally 15 hours a day. And I would pick a philosopher that I found interesting, and I'd read everything they wrote from start to finish. And this was my idea of fun. And, um, and it's, and Nietzsche always stuck with me as one of the most profound thinkers and individualist. And it's funny because, what the stack does, as you referenced the stack, and the reason the books are called Fifth Shock, because the first book I wrote was the Fourth Shock. But Toffler really did, he was an alarmist, and I was never really, I don't like alarmists. I don't, I find most people who are alarmists are trying to reach for your pocketbook, not your brain. And so across all aspects of society, from global warming to the end of times, this is not a new idea. And so, and I said in the book, I believe in the Fifth Shock, I said, when somebody says trust the science, you should just follow the money, because you don't trust science, you verify science and you challenge it. So, and that's usually the sign of a charlatan, in my opinion. So, Nietzsche always struck me as just this violent individualist, and in a collectivist world, that stood out to me. And I always really had very little likes. Really didn't like Karl Marx and the socialist and all that, the collectivist, as I'll call them. And I'll tell you that so Nietzsche really allowed me to think for myself, and forced it. And you get, Atlas Shrugged is not taught in most schools because it's a gateway drug to deeper philosophy. Ayn Rand would roll over in her grave hearing me say that, but it was for me, at least. It led, she was, you know, vehement that she was not, had nothing to do with Nietzsche, but that was not true at all. And so she led me there. And so I've always been very individualistic. I believe, I don't believe in, um, I, I think when you give a man freedom, you take something more precious from him, his dignity. So you've got to earn it yourself. And that's kind of how I've always seen it. Now I realize different people have different skill sets, and we don't all start with the same hand. But I just start. I can't have no complaints how I started, but that's how I got into philosophy. And then at all the time I was hacking code, and I started my first software company when I was a kid, and I was 19, 20 years old, I started a small company that eventually got sold to a major publisher 3 years later. So I was 4 years later. So I was 24, 25 years old, and I just sold my first company. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm sure I left hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on the table, because I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I didn't want to sleep on the floor anymore. So just about any deal would have worked. And and then I sold that, and then I started my next company in the '90s, early in 1992, and that company grew, and the internet bubble hit, and it was wild. And to have a software company in the middle of the internet storm was fascinating. Um, but I did like the going back to Toffler. I saw the internet as a shock to the global economy. And the story I tell people all the time, and I'm sure I've told you before, man. If this were 1996 and we were sitting in a cafe having a coffee, I would say to you, Matthew, this internet thing is going to change the world. And you'd say, yeah, how are we going to make money? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm telling you, this thing is going to touch everything. And so you live through that once. And I'll tell you a quick story. Huge student of military history. I was an odd kid in the rural Louisiana. I read constantly. And so in the sixth grade, I had read every single book in the public library on military history. I started at the top and went to the bottom. It wasn't a big library. So then my parents got me the military book club. So I'd get a book every month and I'd read that. And so it was really cool. And I remember telling my mother when I was in the sixth grade, it was her favorite story. I would say to her all the time, I was born too late. And she'd be like, what are you talking about? I'd be like, I was supposed to fight in World War II. That was the biggest 1,000-year event in history of man. and it's not going to happen again in my lifetime. And so what am I going to do? And then in the 90s, I called her one day and I thought, that story you tell, you can't tell that story anymore. She goes, why? I said, because the internet's bigger than World War II. And to be born in it and to be at the right place, right time, really dumb luck to stumble into that adventure and just watch it. It was fascinating. I mean, I raised so much money. Remember the old saying, if you have a PowerPoint presentation, you get 10 million. If you have a PowerPoint and a spreadsheet, you get 20 million. Didn't matter how stupid your idea was. It was a bubble. And so I was smack dab in the middle of it, and I learned a lot, and it was fascinating. But okay, so then again, I think, well, that was my once in a thousand year opportunity, and I did pretty good with it. I could have done better, could have done worse. Uh, and then here comes AI. This thing people call artificial intelligence, but it's not artificial. It's no more artificial than a car is artificial transportation. It's alien. It's alien intelligence. It's something different. And so our words don't really match the ideas that are flying around these days. And it's not our fault, but we do need to, I say this in the book, we need to find a better vocabulary to explain what we're talking about. And that takes time and it takes people coming together in agreement. So it's going to be a long haul, and so I see the AI as this second 1,000-year event. Maybe I need to shorten my time horizon because maybe it seems like it's
Things are
happening every 20,
accelerating.
30
Yes.
years. Yeah.
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 Yeah,
And
I
so
mean,
that's part of that, that curve that we're on. But the difference between AI and the internet, I think, is quite profound. And I'll try to explain here. I try to explain in the book.
well, you call it a shock, and so I want to unpick. You say this is the most fundamental shock beyond anything we've seen in history, beyond the Industrial Revolution, beyond Turing. This is the time now.
There is no doubt in my mind. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind this is the biggest transition the human race will go through since maybe the birth of fire, since we could control fire and not live at the complete mercy of nature. Um, we might have gone full circle. We may start living at the complete mercy of this alien intelligence. So maybe we need some more fire. So yes, I really do believe that. And the difference is, Matt, people always say, is AI evil? They ask me all the time. I'm like, well, let's go back to the internet. They said the same thing about the internet. It was going to change everything. They said the same thing about the steel plow when that came out. I mean, it's the same arguments over and over again. The Luddites never get a new argument. They just keep making the same damn argument. Because they're afraid. It's not, and I understand uncertainty is something that makes people very nervous. And they'd rather know they have it's Dumb and Dumber when he says, would you say the odds of you dating me are 1 in a million? And she goes, yeah. He goes, you're saying I got a chance. That's the human brain at work. As long as there's some mathematical probability, they're fine. But when you say, well, the future is completely uncertain, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, they just break down. But the internet is like a gun. I used to say, a gun is not moral. A gun doesn't decide to kill you. A gun doesn't decide to do anything. It's a tool. And the internet was just a global tool. And that's the difference between, a stone hammer and the internet. The stone hammer is very local. The internet is global. But it's still just a tool. And however, the difference with AI is just a tool. It is a math crunching machine, but it's more like a nuclear weapon than it is like a gun. And if you get it wrong, it can have huge implications.
Let's unpick that a bit because in your book you argue for this concept called the stack, and I'd like you to unpick that a little because it's interesting. I've seen arguments about the stack previously, but you argue something very different in your average stack. Thoughts that there is some kind of great consolidation of computing that happens by accident that is essentially benign. We're seeing something very, very different here. Would you expound on your theories central to the
Yes.
book, really?
Yeah. So the stack is not any one particular system. Like you said, it's layers of systems that have evolved through business processes. through attempts to create wealth. So capitalism at its finest, doing what it does. And so I don't believe anyone. I'm not a big conspiratorialist. I don't believe anyone just woke up one day. Let's design this highly complex layers of information systems that track every eye movement, every purchase, everything that every human does. I don't think this was set out as a master plan. I think it just evolved from complexity. But what has evolved, and the numbers speak for it, you have 10 companies that are $1 trillion companies, and all they sell is information. And they don't even sell information, they sell information about information. No one cares about my Google searches. They don't care about my purchases, but in the aggregate, it becomes very interesting. And this is the problem. So the stack is all these systems that interact to shape not just what we do, but why we do it. And that moral part is emerging. And AI can accelerate that by intentionally manipulating the
Okay,
why.
intention. Like, I mean, let's whoa, that's a bit. You can't just jump intention there and AI and expect to run away from that. Unpick that a little, please.
Well, so it's the difference between AI, AGI, I think is still a difference, but we went from being
Well, we
a
can't be
data.
evil unless we have intention.
Of
Like,
course,
I'm anchoring back
that's exactly.
into right.
It's a moral issue, and
Yes.
I was never a huge moralist, I was never very religious per se. I always thought religion was kinda silly, of all kinds, not picking on any one of them. I have gone full circle on that the literal interpretation of religious doctrines. And I'm not just talking about the Abrahamic gods. I'm talking about Mithras and Zeus and you know the literal interpretation of these things is silly. But the spiritual interpretation of them, what they're trying to imbue in human society, is that if you only want pleasure, you're gonna suffer. And if you only want pain, you're gonna suffer. So you gotta find a balance and you gotta find a morality. And morality is, like you said, choice. It's it's recursive is the word I keep using in the book, in that I can go out and make a mistake, feel pain, work that into my system of belief. Ayn Rand did it perfectly, right, with objectivism. She's like, if it's not objectively true, who cares if it's theoretically possible? And she was an objectivist, and that boils it down to morality is about what works in society at that time. There is no fixed. I mean, Plato might think there's the perfect morality in his cave, but outside of his cave. But in general, morality is fluid, just like concepts of beauty are fluid, because it's a
Oh,
reflection of what we hold
relativism.
valuable.
We would have
Yes.
lost most of our audience, mate. Youth, moral. Can't be discussing that. Not now. Not these days.
Okay. Alright. So AI is bringing a layer of intention, meaning, uh, and it's called the alignment problem. What when you design an AI, you're gonna put some rules, but we don't understand how they come to their conclusions. There's no way to even. I read something the other day, and I'm trying to remember the guy. He's brilliant. He said, if we went back 1,000 years with our cell phone and showed it to the people 1,000 years ago, and said, "Here's our cell phone," and they'd be like, "Okay," and you say, "Well, this is the transistor, this is the GPS module, this is." They wouldn't understand what you were talking about. They'd be like, "What's electricity?" And so they wouldn't have the tools to even understand what you're trying to explain to them. So AI kind of works like that for us, is that it what it does inside this matrix of math is not clear to us, and it may not even make sense to us. And but those decision making algorithms are evolving, and we can't always control them. And that's why the stack becomes from a data gathering, uh, you know, 1984. I compared to 1984. Control system to now an influence system, and so capturing the data is one thing, but then using that to shape value in humanity is another, including voting. You know, Democracy is under siege not from the Russians, but from these manipulative algorithms in the stack that are pushing ideas around, and who controls that, and who has a say in what those things do. Uh,
Can
Mark
we? Can we?
Zuckerberg.
Indeed, and we've seen that. Can you unpick the the a little of the value proposition of the stack. I think it's really useful for people to know what it's not just about pure capital, but that's an important part. And what we're seeing is kind of a new economy being developing. Would you unpick that for me?
Sure. A great analogy is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution changed the world. No one's going to doubt that. Um, but it did so unevenly at first, and it's still uneven. And a lot of people would argue. But in the early days, the capitalists really accumulated most of the capital, right, and the benefits from capitalism. Marx was not wrong in his description of the problem. The worker is minute. And the worker, in Marx's view, is being removed from his value chain, from his sense of purpose as becoming an artisan to a cog in a wheel where they never get the final product. They never get to feel like they contributed to society in a meaningful way. And this disconnect was not physical, it's mental, it's moral, it's spiritual, in his words. And by the way, Adam Smith, the founder of capitalism, you read the two of them side by side, it's really quite fascinating how much they agreed on. Now, on that point, that what they're trying to do is keep humans valuable and spiritually connected to each other and to their life. And so what happened in the Industrial Revolution is the capitalists consumed too much, controlled too much capital. It was unfair. It was fundamentally unfair. I'm a worker. I go to your factory. I lose an arm. I can't work in your factory. Tough for me. My family starves. Not fair, because the workers are the means of production. And in the individual, we are voiceless. But in the aggregate unions, we take power back to the worker. Now, I'm not a unionist and I'm not a socialist at all. But there is value in that argument that humanity needs to stay engaged and spiritual. And so now, and what happened? Well, Henry Ford broke the mold, I think, and when he said the workers those who produce the goods should be able to afford the goods. And that makes and that put a slow down to socialism and communism, as that was an alternative to the state
I,
controlling
I, I
everything.
mean, I think it put a slowdown to capitalism as well. He instinctively knew that too much automation would destroy his staff from being able to buy his product.
And
So,
it wasn't good for the world. Yes. Okay. Now, so what the world needs right now is a Henry Ford in the big tech firms, because the same problem is here. I am the means of production. They take my data before, if you're born today, they're taking data before you leave the womb. And after I'm dead, they're going to use my data to create value. How is that fair? How is it fair that I'm the means of production and the stack takes all my information and yours and everybody on this call and monetize it, and you get nothing? Nothing today, not in the future. Your estate gets nothing. It's fundamentally broken. And I do not accuse these companies of setting out to do it this way. The world has evolved, economics has evolved to where that's what's happening. And so I don't ascribe nefarious intent to anybody, but I do say that the economic system needs to be turned on its head, that Google should act as my agent. They should send me an email saying, "Hey, we would like to represent you and all your data, and we'll give you 30 cents on every dollar we make." And then Microsoft can call me and say, "I'll give you 40 cents." And then Apple call me, "I'll give you 50 cents." And maybe there's a government way to do this, and a baseline. I call it a universal behavioral income, not a basic income, but your behavior from the minute you're born to the minute you die is being monetized, and you're getting none of it. So rather than having a universal basic income, which is at the barrel of a gun, extortion, taxation, why not flip this model and have the big tech firms act as agents of value creation for citizens around the world? And it may be a lot of money, it may not be a lot of money. There would be a market for it, but it doesn't exist now. They're capturing all of it. And that's why you have multi-trillion-dollar companies and then the rest of us. And so it's just not sustainable. And I would, love to hear the senior management of these big firms admit that. Just say there has to be something different. But the problem is, it's hard to walk away from hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue a month. So maybe it takes a revolution, and it can be physical. I'm not opposed.
Well,
Yeah, so, but
we'll come back to that.
yeah,
Let's
but
just
it could be a digital revolution that
yeah.
we need
There's
government. If government has any agency left, it should step in and figure out a way. And I know that's a tall order for the people in government, but somebody's got to figure this out because you have a tinderbox of the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are not eating dirt anymore. So it's easy to keep them at bay because you give them a cell phone, but it's still not fair. And they're a nest of time. So the other part of the stack. So why aren't we having revolutions? Why aren't we having unions? End user unions. Because they're buying us off with the stack. The stack gives us constant dopamine hits, and we just keep clicking, duh, 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 generating more value for them, and we're just too happy to care. I've called the metaverse the temple of voluntary extinction. That it's just a process for keeping the proletariat at bay and keeping them basically drugged on dopamine hits until they fade away. And look at birth rates; it's working. And
yeah.
so,
It is. I mean, it does feel reminiscent of heading towards Nietzsche's Last Man, and
yes,
to unpick this a little. Um, we are being harvested, is your argument? Something I would I would agree with, and if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, we didn't really get rid of the leadership. We augmented it with the industrialists. We still had the class structure and the nobles, and we augmented it with the super wealthy, and they intermarried, and really there were about 3-4 generations of people who really bore the brunt of the horror of the Industrial Revolution before things changed, and actually took religious movements, it took the Quakers, it took the intersection between religion and industry to give us some of the earlier movements, the cooperatives, the more balanced, fair, equitable. So what you're arguing for is somehow in this rise of the technology stack that we need a mechanism for the fair control and distribution of value, and that value is actually data and information.
yes, I call it data sovereignty. My data is mine. You cannot own my DNA sequence. You cannot. I don't know how that's even possible.
Yeah,
You
and yet
cannot
they
own my
trade it.
behavior there. Yeah,
It's
and you
traded
can't.
every day. People don't
Yes,
realize it's worth $4,000, but you
yes.
don't get a dime of it.
I know of a study, and this is verifiable. They took 10 strands, sequenced DNA from 10 people, and they paid 25 a pharmaceutical company paid $25 million. Why? Well, those people survived cancer, and no one can figure out how, or some horrible disease. And so your DNA might be, you're talking about a baseline sequence of $4,000, an average person. But, you might be, your DNA could generate a lot of money for you. And remember this about DNA studies, they're longitudinal. We want to see the epigenetic expression, not just the genes themselves. So it's your whole life is this data is being used. So theoretically, you should be getting a check your whole life just by contributing your DNA to the marketplace for DNA. But you should contribute it and control it, not the other way around. And if government has any use left, this has to be an area where, otherwise, you're playing with fire. Either the human race, the poem "Hollow Men" by Eliot says, we're either going to go out with a bang or a whimper. And right now, the human race is going out with a whimper. And if you can keep them drugged long enough, maybe you'll get away with it. But
Right,
when they get
right.
bored of the drugs, you might have a problem.
So I love the fact you throw out complex concepts. If there is any use for the government left, which infers so much. Swinging back to where I do think it's just horribly sinister is the fact if you think that your name, Bienvenu, you're probably the most famous Bienvenu that's ever existed, other than the guy that invented the tube in Paris. And so, I mean, your name has value to you. Now, you lease your name to these Facebooks, etc., and they earn money off you, your profile, your name. Then, if you say something they don't approve, they take that from you. They own you, your name, your data in their ecosystem, and they've literally stolen your name. Now, if you think, going back to the cathedral builders, 3-4 generations of father to son to father to son, and it took generations before you were even allowed to do something that complicated. Your name was what anchored you in your character. And now we're leasing our data, ourselves, our soul, as you call it. And I do want to get into the soul, but what you then proffer, which is the shock, is this notion of the stack actually isn't benign. Now, and you refer to Nietzsche in the book as part of how you're using for your framework to analyze what's occurring, and of course he's got this concept of will to power in and how things are motivated. Are we seeing that the stack actually has its own will to power? Are we seeing that?
I would say yes, and I put it this
Would
way.
you unpick it, please, just a
Sure.
little more?
My understanding of that concept, and Nietzsche's he's a lot, but my understanding is, when I first read it, I'm like, yes, of course, conscious beings seek to express their power, conscious beings, but that's not what he said. What he said was all beings. So it comes down to, like, so a plant is expressing its will to power. It's struggling with other plants to dominate and to express itself. And so it comes down to, what is a being? Is the stack a being? And do beings have to be made of organic matter any more than minds have to be made of wetware? So in that, if you take that approach, if you say that you could reverse it. Anything that expresses its power is a being. And so in that sense, I'm not suggesting that the stack is consciously expressing itself in a wheel to power, but in an evolutionary context of what works and doesn't work, its feedback mechanisms are designed to help it express its power. And in that state it is. And where AI complicates this thing is, you've built this global body that's about to get a brain. And so
That's terrifying. That's terrifying.
yes, yes,
Right, I'm not
yes,
gonna sleep at
and
night.
that, yeah. Well, you might not have to sleep for long. So I was talking to someone yesterday about, how could an AI take over the planet? And I read this. I got to find the guy's name. I apologize. It's a complicated name, but he put this idea in my head. He's like, okay, an AGI could develop nanobots that would and take all the DNA sequencing off the internet, figure out a weapon, then send those nanobots into the airstream so that it infects all humans at one time, and then at some point presses a button and all humans are gone at once through nanotechnology.
Yeah, this is Black
You
Mirror
know,
type stuff, yeah.
yeah, it's crazy stuff. And this, the argument is that you only get one chance of getting AGI right. I don't believe that. That's again, I think. First of all, it
It's
used to be when I was.
alarmist. Yeah.
Yeah, it's alarmist. When I was a kid, I grew up in rural Louisiana. I was America, man. I thought I was going to die charging the Kremlin steps with an an M16 capping commies. And I grew up in America, and they would all, and I used to argue with people all the time. When I was a little kid, I'll bet you $1,000, which I didn't have $1,000. Uh, there'll never be a nuclear war. And the old guys would get so mad at me. They're like, no, there's going to be, it could be, no, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but it doesn't matter. If there is one, I'm not paying you anyway. And so, and so, nobody's paying you. And so the same thing, if this guy's right, okay, then you're right. And the world ends and okay. But that's not normally what happens. And maybe this is the time. Maybe this one's different. But more likely, it's an evolutionary process of starts and failures. But like you said something earlier in this call, which uh, I chuckle because I have a dark sense of humor. You said there were a few generations that really paid the price for the Industrial Revolution. We might be the few generations that really pay the
Yeah.
price
Oh, yeah.
for
Yeah.
AI. But do I think it's the end of times? No. And the book, I try to point a third way. I call it a dyad between AI and human working together. But we have to have our proper lanes, and this is where soul comes in. This is where
Tell us about your
recursion comes in.
concept of the soul, because it's really important, I think, as we layer this on.
Yeah, and as I said, I was never terribly, interested in religion. I was interested in religion my whole life. I've studied every religion I get my hands on, but I saw it as an artifact, something to study, not something to believe, and trying to understand why it's necessary in every culture that's ever existed. And when Nietzsche killed God in the 1800s, what the hell was he talking about? And well, I think this is it. I think a lack of a higher purpose and a reduction to hedonistic dopamine hits fed to us by a amoral infrastructure led by some probably immoral individuals,
Right.
and amoral tools in the hands of immoral individuals on a global scale can lead to some really messed up stuff. And so that's my concern. So in thinking through all this, dystopian future. Well, what's the light? Through night and blood to light is my favorite saying. There's Nacht und Blut zum Licht. And it was supposedly Bismarck when he was uniting Germany. But it resonates with me because it's true. In order to gain anything of value, almost by definition, there has to be some form of suffering. So a struggle. Suffering is a tough word because it's struggle. It's Nietzsche's will to power less than being beaten to a pulp with a chain.
Yeah.
And so so
You
so,
rise
so
above
struggle.
your value set to discover
Yes,
new values
yeah.
until you
Think about
become
learning.
sovereign
It's,
individual.
so one thing I say all the time is there is no all-knowing God. In my opinion, if there is a God that matters, there may be gods but they don't. We're nothing to them. But if there's a God that matters, it's an all-learning God, not an all-knowing God, because learning is what the universe is about. It's certainly what human consciousness, in my opinion, is about. But to learn is to struggle. You either have you either have to do something you never did before. You you overcame ignorance, and that is a struggle against ignorance. Or worse, the harder one is you have to overcome things you thought you knew. You have to, as the old Mark Twain saying, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that's just not so. Well, we get taught things that are so. Morality, slavery's fine. Is it really? you know, but at the time, that's morality. And so you have to overcome the prejudices and the socialization process that built your mind. And that's the hardest kind of learning. And the older you, and I hate to use the word age, but the longer you experience life, the harder it gets to find new things you don't think you already know. And so I always say, you don't age while you're learning. You only get older when you're not learning. The problem is there's only so much you can learn in, in a lifetime. I mean, I'm 400 years old, so you can see it's working. And so,
I don't know, mate. We're kind of similar. I think you're aging better than I. So there's this groundwork of the soul, which is really interesting because in your book, like, so you have this concept of the transhumanists, Homo Deus, who believe, we are, which is almost everyone out there, all of the big tech guys believe we are marching to merge with the stack, that the stack will make us gods, which is really fascinating because I don't think there's a
yes.
single story in history where man becomes God ends well.
No.
I just can't think of one. They tend to go pretty badly pretty quick. But you
Yes.
reject that, and actually you're calling for something much greater. Would you kindly share that with us?
Sure. So gravity, we all know what gravity is, but we don't know what causes it. Consciousness, we all know what it is, but we don't know what causes it. And so soul to me, and words matter, and it's hard because religious people have a certain definition of soul. So I wish I could come up with a better word, but 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 this the the beauty of life in its entirety, not in its limited pleasure only sphere or pain only sphere, but experience, conscious experience and growth is the soul to me. And so the stack is making that unnecessary for most people. And and I find that the threat to humanity, that it's offering us the worst of control governments, like 1984, and the worst of Brave New Worlds, and it's combining it in a global efficient stack that is everywhere at once. And so it's robbing humanity of its sense of purpose. And so, where do we get a sense of purpose for humanity? Nietzsche says it's from you, the individual. And unfortunately, I'm reduced to that at this point because God is not doing his job. That's just my 2 cents worth. God needs to step up here. And maybe it's time for a new God. This is a true story. A kid called me the other day. He's a friend of a friend, bright young man. And he says, "Man, I read your book. It really messed my head up. I'm on a path to be an engineer and all this stuff." He goes, "Now I don't know what I want to do." Blah 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 blah. Blah. And so I said, "Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say it had an
Nothing.
effect on you."
It's all meaningless. Welcome to
Yeah,
nihilism.
yeah,
This won't last
exactly.
long.
Exactly. So he called me a few weeks later, and he's like, "So, I've been thinking, what career what should I pursue if I really want to make an impact on the future?" I said, "Start a new religion," and I said it really flippantly, and he's like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, just start a new religion. We need a new God." He's like, "I don't know if I'm ready to be a Messiah." I'm like, "Sure you are. Go give it a go." It never ends well either. Messiahs don't usually end well. But they get a lot of
I
good
don't know.
suffering,
The,
and
the the priests make a lot of money through the
oh yeah,
process.
but these are not messiahs. These are the messiah's bankers. Come on.
Man,
And so
we're gonna get banned, aren't we? This is great.
yeah, yeah. No, no. So listen, but so the soul. So what I try to do in the book is I look at not just Western versions of the soul. It's an eternal concept, and and my optimism, and I really I'm not afraid of the future. I'm excited about the future, uh, but so socially we have to get our head out of our fourth point of contact, as we call it in the army, and start thinking these things through. And government is a huge disappointment to me. Politicians on average do not impress me intellectually, certainly not morally. And so,
Yeah, that bar is
there's
dropping pretty fast.
oh my word, bro. So
We're in
anyway, let's
trouble,
not
aren't we?
that's
Yeah,
depressing. Let's not do that.
yeah,
Let's just stay positive here.
yeah. Go for
Yes,
it.
but you said it. You kind of summed it up. The soul is the expression of the individual in a context of the collective. So what is driving us forward as a collective, as a race, as a society? And it doesn't have to be a global society. I mean, you got your Jews, you got your Christians, you got Muslims, you got Buddhists, but they all have a driving ethos. And so we need a more, I think, meaningful ethos. And I don't know where that comes from. And religion is my backup, but the stack is robbing us of even that desire, and that's the evil of the stack right now. It's a dopamine machine. It's just dumbing everyone down. You know what? I was a part of the internet revolution. We were gonna take it to the man. The small guy's gonna have huge leverage, and there were brief moments of that. But the opposite occurred. The big absorbed it all and now controls it all. So my libertarian hopes were dashed you by the last 20 years. And AI will give us another chance to liberate humans. But know this, and I think this is important. My philosophy is really tied to the individual. And I'm not an existentialist per se, but the individual is what matters. And when we try to normalize the individual, all individuals, we usually end up with gray goo, just a blob of nothing. And in our societies, communism does not have a great track record of building inspirational societies. Um, democratic capitalism has had a great run, but I truly argue that we're reaching the end of that's because of the stack and the stack's capabilities. We're reaching the end of the utility of the democratic capitalist process. We need Okay, if we can't get a new God, can we at least get a new economic and political system that's more just and that recognizes where value is created from an economics perspective and maintains human liberty and dignity and agency to make decisions for themselves? This is what needs to happen. And AI can help us get there. And the other thing about the AI doomsayers, and let's go back real quick before I say that. Harari, who's brilliant, by the way. I mean, he always tickles my brain. He's one of the few
Mm-hmm.
guys I just have to put his books down and like, holy God, this guy's smart. Um, but that's a fantasy too. It's not a fantasy. It may well happen. We all may become
Yeah,
machine
for the
man.
super rich, that will
Yeah,
definitely happen.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the rest of us.
Yeah, the rest of us, well, we'll have our metaverse. We'll play games till we die, and everybody's good. But that's an atrophying of the human dynamic. Meaning, AI is not creative. It's not contextually creative, and humans are necessary for the creative spark, at least for now. And AGI might change that, but you're taking that away, and I am vigorously opposed to it, and I don't think it's gonna happen. I think the average man, I'm a Jeffersonian when it comes to versus Hamilton. I think the average man is good, decent, smart, smarter than most experts, to be perfectly honest, and more deserving of respect. And they're going to rise up. They're not going to go quietly into the dark. That's what I believe. And the way you rise up is transforming government
Right.
and economic models.
And that
And
this is
that's
sorry,
yeah,
I mean, I was
please.
gonna
No,
say
no.
this is a great sorry, 'cause I'm a blockchain guy, but I got into blockchain for data sovereignty, not so I could, transfer, wealth around. So, and this is where we anchor on values. So you proffer, the notion of a homo,
Noeticus.
no, thank you, I'd forgotten that
Yes.
for a moment. A man of wisdom, a man of a soul. So your proffer, if I understand correctly, is that actually, and it's something I agree with, we have this spark of divinity within all human beings, and whether you see it as a consciousness, which we don't understand. I mean, I find the Sam Harris podcasts where he tells us there is no such thing as God, but when he takes LSD, he finds God pretty darn quick. And he's done
There's a
more
chapter
on
of my book on LSD, by the way. It's pretty good. I've never
so
done it, but I've seen it happen.
so yeah, no comment. So he's done, I mean, he's done a lot of work on consciousness, which I find him so fascinating. But you're saying that this anchor to this conscious divine, this nature, this wisdom, will help us rise above and see the stack for what it is, and from it we will generate this new set of values. Have I understood correctly your premise?
100%. Wisdom is the goal, and it is the power of man in the future. It's wisdom, not data, not information, not even knowledge. But our societies do not train for wisdom. They train for information and knowledge. But so we need to think through what it means to be wise. I mean, it's just full circle. It's going back to Athens, and you're starting to think about what is wisdom? Because that's our only contribution to the future is wisdom. So we should spend a lot of time. I had talked to a philosopher professor at Clemson University a few months ago. He read the book and he called me. We had a joyous 1 hour conversation. He says, "Well, as a philosophy professor, what do you think? How do you think AI is going to affect me?" I'm like, "Should be very good for business because you're the last bastion of human value." I said, "So I think everybody's going to become a philosopher
Mm, I hope
because
so. At
yeah,
least
me
a
too.
little bit, you know?
Yes, yes. And so, yeah, what passed for knowledge and is being usurped. So we need a better society. I mean, and it's not going to happen overnight. And like I said, I hate repeating myself, but you nailed it. There's going to be several generations here of real misery and confusion. But what I think will come out of it, just as in the Industrial Revolution, a better world where less people are starving, where more people are allowed to express themselves and find value and contribute, not take, contribute to the welfare
Well,
of humanity going forward.
I and so the contribution is the inverse value of what we see. So capitalism says you lose value as you get older. Interestingly, as we get older, we get sicker, or we have different experiences. Our data becomes more valuable. To your earlier point, which
Yes.
is incredible, and that changes things on its head. So you know, we obviously from a blockchain perspective, your average blockchain person is an individualist. They typically have a libertarian framework to them. My keys, my wallet, my assets, my data, etc. Not my keys, not my car, not my house is kind of where we're heading to. Um, but what you're proposing actually is something which is really interesting to me. This kind of view of a collective hero. So when I think of your average kind of hero in how we perceive them today, they're very individual. And what I consider from that is that actually it's been a bit of a curse to society where we now into hyper individualism, where we don't identify by anything and therefore we identify by being the other, and that's creating a lot of societal conflict. But you're proposing a collective hero narrative. Is that correct? That we
Yeah, that's
have
what to
to
me,
rise
isn't that
as a collective to beat this?
isn't that the concept of God in every culture? A collective hero concept. Isn't that Jesus? Isn't that Odin? Isn't
Interesting.
that Zeus?
Interesting.
And so that's why I keep saying we need a God. We need something that brings uh, these ideas together in a spiritual, mythological, even way that drives us to achieve something. So, what is the goal of Homo noeticus? What is the goal of the wise man? To be wise for himself? Well, go sit on a mountaintop. You don't need the rest of us. And and if you're happy with that, go get it. But that's not humanity. That's not to me my purpose. My purpose is to be part of something bigger than myself. And I'm having a hard time finding that outside of myself. And I think I speak for a lot of people where, this this age of options. We all have so many options. There's nothing driving us to something that's meaningful spiritually. And, being a good citizen is great. Being rich, okay. So capitalism, capitalism is magic. It's really beautiful system. But but it can be a destructive system in the long run. And this is what Teddy Roosevelt recognized. This is what Marx recognized. And so I think we're reaching that point on the capitalist side of things. We need to invert economics. We need to invert education. We need to change the way we are preparing our children for the future. And that's not a one man thing. And so if you care about humanity, and many people don't, and that's your prerogative too, um, then you've gotta be more serious, and especially if you're running a $1 trillion company. You how much more billions can you take? I'm not here to limit anybody's wealth. Go make us bazillion dollars, I don't care. But take some responsibility and help us shape this argument, and do the right thing.
Yeah, um, uh, uh, it's a fascinating concept. So we're into a situation now where guys like me believe that decentralization can be the cure, but also what you argue in your book, it can create a new cage if we don't do it right. And so the absence, what you're proposing, if I am correct, is that the problem is metaphysical. And guys like me going, we've got a solution to that, and it's decentralization, and everyone can have a wallet, and everyone can be rich, and everyone will eat. Now, what are we inadvertently doing? We're giving the stack a mechanism for additional control. And I believe now we enter the concept of the last man. And I think I'd like to give you some time to unpick the last man, the two roads ahead. At the end of your book, you discuss a framework for the way forward. I'd love us to end on your explanation. What is the way forward? How do we get out of what this paradox of either we suffer and learn, but the stack's going to take suffering away from us, and therefore great, but we want to be heroes and sovereign, and the stack's going to make us do that. Great. We end up in the stack under control either way. So how do we get out of this?
Great question, and, yes, I mean, I call that the twin prisons. It's Brave New World versus 1984. Pick your prison, but it's a prison. The savage in the Brave New Worlds, I feel like that savage a lot of times. Just I don't want comfort. I don't want peace. I want to struggle. I want to learn. I want to grow. And people think I'm crazy, some people. Um, but let's start with the basics, the blockchain. So in the fourth shock, which I wrote in 2009, it's a lot about data, how data is valuable, how people don't appreciate the value of data. But I posited that at some point there'll be a mechanism that can control data outside your firewall. Remember, this is 2009. The internet is still evolving, and the stack is just being born. Also, blockchain. The paper comes out in 2009, Satoshi's paper. So But I said, at some point there'll be a technology that will allow, and I was thinking economically. I was not thinking metaphysically at all. I was just thinking if you could get a technology that could take data and secure it in the wild, well, then you can have the foundation for a new economic system, was basically my big idea. And blockchain comes along, and I'm like, and then the reason I wrote the fifth shock initially, and it took me a few years, was the convergence of blockchain, big data, and AI are going to give us the tools to monetize data, and it's happening. Look at it. Trillions of dollars of wealth are being created. But I didn't factor in until the last few years its impact on humanity. And so I re-embraced Marx, which shocked me. But I reread Marx and said, this guy's not as crazy as I thought he was. And he's still crazy, but he's not as crazy as I thought he was. But Nietzsche's crazy too. And so, as Nietzsche famously said, one must have chaos in his soul in order to give birth to a dancing star. So crazy is okay with me. It's just I didn't appreciate it. And so blockchain, I see what you see, and I just saw it as an economic tool until the last few years. And then I started to see it. Maybe it's exactly the paradox. Blockchain Blockchain could be a tool. It is a tool, and it could be used to maintain human sovereignty and agency into the future. I believe it will be part of the solution, at least from what we know today. And the problem with people today, they think the tools today have to solve tomorrow's problems, and therefore that's where you get all this dystopian nonsense, because they don't. They assume they're the last man, the last thinker, and the future is just bleak. It doesn't work that way, and so I have faith in the evolutionary process of ideas, and blockchain will continue to evolve. But the impetus of blockchain, the ideas of libertarians, is exactly what you said. It's a foundation for human agency and liberty. Could it be used against us? Of course, as all things can be, but it's a start. Where it ends, I don't know. But it is metaphysical in that we're still trying to apply pre-stack morality and possibilities and education to the post-stack world. And this is a fundamental shift in the way humans will evolve going forward, I believe. And so we can't we can't cut the feet to fit the shoes. Society needs to build a new pair of shoes, a new moral framework that guides blockchain and makes sure that it is in the hands of liberty. Same with AI. That's what they're all talking about, trying to do that with AI, which is a real challenge uh, because of the alignment problem, amongst many others. We won't get into that. But um, so so I see blockchain. Always saw it as a tool for value creation, but I also think it's a moral tool. Can be used as a moral tool, and that's why I'm fascinated to talk to you. Is that I I think the world in which you live in every day, holds the keys to a future societal structure, not just economically, but politically and ultimately morally. It's going to come from DeFi, blockchain. We're not going to get rid of stack. You're never getting rid of stack, but you can harness it to drive what forward. This is the problem I keep going back to. Okay, we can harness the stack to do what? Do we want to make every man a philosopher, every man, woman, child a philosopher? What is our purpose as a society? I like Musk because at least he's saying, let's get off this planet. Yeah, why not? Why not spread consciousness to the universe? We've got nothing better to do. And so why not? At least it's a global collective idea that can drive hope forward. For but the tools are in place. We just need to flip the script. That's what I believe. We need a new economic system. We need new economic realities, and we need new political systems that perhaps are not based on where you were born. That's a silly idea if you think about it.
It's a really
So
silly idea. Flags are a silly concept, really. For like,
yes, and fake lines on a map.
yeah, yeah,
I
let's
should be
kill
able to
each
choose
other
the
for a
people.
flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's heretical to say, but it's just such a strange concept that 100 years ago someone draws a line, and now we have to stab each other to maintain that line.
Look at the Middle East. I mean, the Brits come in, they rewrite the map in the Middle East, and we got war for 100 years. And so,
It's not just the Middle East, but anyway,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
moving on from my heritage.
Yeah. So that's how I see blockchain. I really think it's a fundamental tool. I think DeFi is a ton of fundamental tool. I think DAOs are fundamental tools
Mm.
for maintaining human agency into the future. In and leveraging the stack, not destroying it, but making it just.
So
That's the challenge.
and I love that. So, but what you proffer is a real challenge. It's actually a multidimensional approach to solving the issues of the stack. We have to rebalance the values, the economic values, make it fairer. But part of that is taking back control, and I wish we could have time to explore that maybe on another podcast. My impression, I love reading your works. You're challenging, you're thoughtful. I always really appreciate it. I uh, I'm a big fan of Orwell. You've mentioned Orwell. Now, what people don't realize is he wrote quite a lot and quite a lot of essays that no one ever bothered to read. And it was until he put it in a story form that actually people went, "Oh, I get that." So I'm wondering whether the next evolution of Ron is to actually take your concepts and make them palatable in a story form that guys like me can understand, because they're wonderful, they're challenging, and yes, I wish more people, to enjoy your works.
Appreciate that. I do fantasize, I wanna write my Atlas Shrugged at some point.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, and but, I I'm shy about it because it's gonna suck, and I don't want it to suck. I'm letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and I need to be smarter than
right,
that. But
right, right. That's a
yeah,
yeah,
I'll tell you a quick anecdote. So little you know this, but none of our listeners would. But I'm an LSU fan at heart, right? So that's my tribe. I chose them, right? And it chose me because I was born in Louisiana, blah blah blah. But I write a poem before every LSU football game, and I have done so for since 2011. And they're stupid. They're hysterical. Hopefully they're funny, but they're crude, crass, nonsensical, but they've become a thing at LSU. But nobody actually reads them. I might get, I send out to 10,000 people, maybe 200 people read them, and then they read them to people, but they're fun. But this year, I wrote a poem for our baseball team because they went to the championship. And somebody turned me on to AI music. So I turned it into a song. Okay. So just using AI, this is the power of AI. Now I'm a songwriter. And I took the same poem that I wrote and I just put it into an AI machine and said, I want this style and this. And it came out. This song is immensely popular. So now everybody on my disability is like, you got to make a song for every poem now. So I have to write one tomorrow before LSU plays Clemson. But now I don't just have to write a poem. I have to turn it into a song. But the song resonates where the poem doesn't.
yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah.
and so it's just, that's the same thing here, I think. People don't even read books. I mean, you write these books, you put your blood in them, and people read a summary of it and think they read it. And so that's the other. I know we're out of time, but impatience is the death knell of depth.
Well,
And
that's part of what you discuss really, and how do we improve the soul? How do we create the man of wisdom, or the human of wisdom? I'm going to wrap it there. I'm going to ask people to go out, and I know it's in verse, which is unprofessional, but go out and purchase The Fifth Shock by Ron Bienvenu, Part One, and you'll be challenged. You'll have to read it a couple of times if you're like me, maybe 3 or 4 times if you're like me. But thank you, Ron. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate it. It's always great to see you, and this has been a pleasure.
thank you. Your staff has been wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. I always love talking to you. So anytime you want me back, just let me know.
Appreciate it.
All right,
And
guys.
take care. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.